Hey, folks, and welcome into the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. Today, I'll be predicting every game on the Texas Longhorns 2023 schedule. In year one, under Steve Sarkisian, 5-7. Year two, they improve to 8-5. Can they make the jump in 2023 to hit that double-digit win mark and compete for a Big 12 championship in their final year in the conference? You're about to find out my take on it. Go ahead and leave your takes on and your predictions on what you think the Longhorns will put up this season record-wise in the comments section below. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. In week one, Longhorns open the season at home against Rice, 35.5-point favorites at the time of this recording. Rice finished 5-8 last year. That was their best season since 2015, and they're tied for the 12th best odds to win the AAC. JT Daniels, the new quarterback for the Owls, coming over from West Virginia, has a nice target in Luke McCaffrey at wide receiver. He's the younger brother of Christian McCaffrey on the San Francisco 49ers. McCaffrey last season led the team in receptions and had 6 touchdowns as well. Rice, 21st in the nation in FBS for turning production, but their offense ranked 77th and defense 76th the season ago, so you kind of take that with a little bit of salt. Daniels, I think, makes Rice better in the sense that Rice has not had a quarterback like JT Daniels in quite some time, but overall, the roster is not going to match up very well to Texas's, I don't think, and I think this is an easy win for the Longhorns to open up the season 1-0 against the Owls. Now, as they move into week two, things get a lot more difficult as Texas gets on a plane and heads over to Tuscaloosa, Alabama to face off against the number 4 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide in the initial preseason AP poll. Alabama 6.5-point favorites at the time of this recording. They finished 11-2 last year. They have the second best odds to win the SEC behind the national champion Georgia Bulldogs. Biggest question mark right now for the Crimson Tide is quarterback and wide receiver. Wide receiver room seems to be struggling with drops, and it seems like that's a pattern that's come from the past 2 seasons. They had 23 last year, 27 the year before. They'll need to sharpen that up if they want to be more precise through the air. Guys like Jermaine Burton going to need to limit those drops there. But there are some rising faces like Kobe Prentice, who we've heard a lot of good things out of in camp at that slot receiver position. So we'll see if the Alabama passing attack is more coordinated this season. But really, quarterback is going to be the main focus here. Jalen Milroe, Tyler Buckner, Ty Simpson, all competing for that starting job. Nick Saban hasn't named a starter yet at the time of this recording, and it's been fairly close in the sense that there hasn't been one guy who's broken out in fall camp just yet in those scrimmages. My gut right now tells me that Jalen Milroe is going to be the starter for Alabama because I think that gives the Alabama offense the best rushing attack, which, in my opinion, is by far their strong suit on offense. When you look at the running back room, Jace McClellan, Roydell Williams, Jan Miller, and Justice Haynes, that's one of, if not the deepest position group on the team, and they're protected by an offensive line who Nick Saban says can go 6 or 7 deep. Guys like Caden Proctor at left tackle, who seems to be emerging from that spot, a 5-star true freshman who looks like he could be a real early impact guy for the Crimson Tide. The Alabama has always had frequently a very good offensive line that can open up holes for them. And with the running back talent they have this season, I think they're going to be a very strong rushing team. And if you quarterback that with a strong rushing quarterback in Jalen Milroe, I think that gives you the best possible offense, at least at the start of the season, especially during week 2 in the early goings. Now, defensively, the D-line is lacking a little bit of depth, which is a concern, but they do have guys who can change the course of a game, and Jaheim Otis and Dallas Turner on defense. So extremely talented there. Nonetheless, don't forget Kool-Aid McKinstry at corner, and one guy who we're hearing a lot about in the offseason so far, true freshman safety Caleb Downs. Seems like he is set up for a monster freshman season. They're comparing him to Minkah Fitzpatrick in Tuscaloosa, which, if you follow college football at all, you know that's high praise, especially for a true freshman. Big key to this game, and I think this is the biggest numbers takeaway that I'm taking from this, Alabama has not lost a home game since November 9th, 2019, and that game was to the LSU Tigers led by Joe Burrow. They went on to win a national championship. So 32-1 for the Crimson Tide at home over the last 5 seasons. But the outlier there is that Alabama is a shocking 125th in returning production. So I think this is going to be a close game, but I think Alabama has the home field advantage. and they pulled this one off. So Texas starts the season 1-1, and they lose week 2 in a very close, once again, highly contested game in Tuscaloosa. Now moving on to week 3, the Longhorns come back to Austin to host Wyoming. Cowboys finished 7-6 last year. They currently have the 5th best odds to win the Mountain West. This is a Cowboys team that lost their 1,000-yard rusher in Titus Swen, and they're looking for a step forward from quarterback Andrew Peasley. He threw 10 touchdowns last season, but had 9 interceptions to go along with it. The big number here that stood out to me is Wyoming 4th overall in FBS when it comes to returning production. So that's a bit of an interesting number, but similarly to Rice, I just don't think the Cowboys have anywhere near a roster close enough to compete with Texas. I think this is another fairly easy victory for the Longhorns. So Texas moves to 2-1 heading into Big 12 play. And to open up Big 12 play, the Longhorns head up the road to Waco to take on Baylor. Baylor finishing 6-7 a season ago. They open up with the 6th best odds to win the Big 12 this year. To be completely honest, I'm not completely sold on Blake Shapen at quarterback for Baylor. He won the starting job, as Dave Aranda announced a few months ago. So I think that's going to be a massive question mark for the Bears. If he can't get it going, then I think they struggle a lot offensively, especially because their offensive line is not a luxury point right now. I think they will struggle to get protection on Shapen, and Shapen can be a little bit wild when he gets out of the pocket, which is why you see some of those turnovers from a season ago. So not really sold on the Baylor offense. And defensively, they were 58th in total defense last year. I think they do see improvement there, especially with a guy like Dave Aranda as head coach. But they're 100th in returning production as well, which I think is a very important metric. I think Texas picks up a win on the road in Baylor to open up Big 12 play, and they move to 3-1 on the season. Heading into week 5, coming back to Austin to host the Kansas Jayhawks. Certainly don't want a repeat of what happened the last time Kansas came into town. Jayhawks last year finishing 6-7 overall, tied 8th best odds to win the Big 12. Really a coming out year for Lance Leipold at Kansas, and Jalen Daniels specifically at quarterback. Absolutely huge getting him back. And they're 2nd overall in FBS in returning production, 1st on the offensive side with 91% of their production returning this year. I mentioned Jalen Daniels, He's the game changer at quarterback. He's going to be the biggest difference maker. Plus, they get Devin Neal, a 1,000-yard rusher, back for another season as well. When you flip the defensive side, Kobe Bryant, a huge get for them as well. But I think that's going to be the Achilles heel for this Jayhawks team. They ranked 127th in team defense last year, and they lost all 4 starters along the defensive line. So a lot of gaps to fill on that defense that wasn't good a year ago. Maybe takes a little bit of improvement this year, but it might take some time to find those replacement guys, get some more experience in there. So I think Texas goes back-to-back wins to start off Big 12 play, and they move to 4-1 on the season. And so headed into the all-important Week 6 against Oklahoma, the Red River rivalry game in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. Sooners ranked 20 in the initial AP poll in the preseason. Oklahoma finished 6-7 overall last year in year 1 under Brent Venables. They open up as the 2nd best favorites to win the Big 12 this season behind Texas. This is a massively improved roster from a season ago. I think that the 49-0 game that Texas put up last year might be fooling some people this year into thinking that, Oklahoma might have the same roster that might be a similar result this year. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that Brent Venables has done a good job finding some pieces, and obviously being healthier going into the season is going to be big for the Sooners as well. Dylan Gabriel comes back at quarterback, and if he's healthy, that's going to be a massive boost for the offense. There's a lot of good things coming out of Andrell Anthony's camp so far this year at wide receiver. Not too much depth behind him there, though. Brennan Thompson comes over from Texas, which is a nice add, but those 2 guys, and you don't really see too much that stands out to you after that. So maybe the wide receiver core a little bit more of a concern offensively there for Oklahoma. But if Andrell Anthony has a big year, I think that can definitely help the Sooners out a little bit. Danny Stutzman will return on defense for the Sooners, led the Big 12 in tackles last season. And I think a huge win for Oklahoma in the portal was landing freshman All-American Deshaun McCullough from Indiana. They ranked 122nd in total team defense last season. I think they see a big improvement this year. You certainly hope to see a big improvement this year if you're an Oklahoma Sooners fan, especially with a defensive-minded coach like Brent Venables. But I think Oklahoma is set up better for the long run than they are here in the short future. So Don't think the roster is there quite yet, but they have the young pieces that will get there. Guys like Jackson Arnold, Peyton Bowen, who are going to be stars for the Sooners later on after they get some more experience under their belts. Current roster at the moment, though, I think Texas still has the advantage, and they pick up back-to-back Red River rivalry wins in back-to-back years against the Sooners. So they move to 5-1 on the season heading into the bye week. And after the bye week, it's a new opponent in the Big 12, the University of Houston. In week 8, Longhorns will travel to Houston to play this one against the Cougars. Cougars finished 8-5 overall last year. They're tied with West Virginia for the lowest odds to win the Big 12. Underwhelmed a lot last season after being a top 20 team back in 2021. Clayton Tune and Tank Dell both go off to the professional ranks, but I think that the Cougars are still pretty solid at the wide receiver position. Matthew Golden had a nice freshman year last year. They bring in Oklahoma State transfer Stephon Johnson. So that's providing a good offensive, or good wide receiver stable, for whoever wins that quarterback job over there between Donovan Smith, who transferred over from Texas Tech, and Lucas Coley, who came from Arkansas. But really, defensively is where you kind of raise your eyebrows a little bit when it comes to the Cougars. They're 119th in returning production on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle for them to overcome in this one. So although it is on the road, I do like Texas in this one. So the Longhorns move to 6-1, picking up a win after the bye week. And after that, they head back to Austin and play another new opponent in what could be a little bit of a homecoming game for Steve Sarkisian against the BYU Cougars. Remember, Sarkisian was the quarterback for the BYU Cougars back in his college days. Cougars finished 8-5 last season as an independent. They're tied with Cincinnati for the second lowest odds to win the Big 12 in their inaugural season in the conference. They bring in Keaton Slovis from the transfer portal, a guy who, in my opinion, is still a little bit unproven through his stints at USC and Pitt so far. But they do have a 1,000-yard rusher as well who comes in by way of UNLV in Aiden Robbins. I think they're going to rely a lot on the running game in this one. A lot of question marks and new pieces overall, really, I think, for BYU. So I'm not sure if everything will mesh well enough in year one in the conference for them to have a strong season. But maybe going forward, we can see BYU teams of the past that are physical, run hard, and win football games. But not in this season, I don't think. I think Texas picks up another victory here, so they improve to 7-1 after back-to-back wins over new conference opponents. And as we head into the home stretch of this schedule, I think things start to get a lot tougher here in week 10. Number 16, Kansas State comes into town. They finished 10-4 overall last year, won the Big 12 conference, third best odds to win the Big 12 in 2023. I think they have a very, very good quarterback coming back in Will Howard. If he stays healthy, no doubt he's the cornerstone of this team and one of the more valuable players, especially considering the losses that the Wildcats had on offense with Deuce Vaughn and Malik Knowles going to the NFL. And then on the defensive side of the ball, obviously they lose Big 12 Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Felix Anyudike-Uzomah to the draft as well. The thing that stands out about me with this game is Will Howard was able to do more with less during his time playing last year, and I think he's only gotten better since then. So I think this game jumps on Texas a little bit, and it gets them by surprise. So they lose their second game of the season to Kansas State at home. But I think that's a little bit of a wake-up call as they head in to Week 11 against number 17 TCU. They go up to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to play this one against the Horned Frogs, who finished 13-2 overall last year, and after their incredible run were the college football national champion runner-ups after they lost the national championship game to Georgia. They opened this year with the fifth best odds to win the Big 12. They're 118th in returning production. I think that really tells the whole story surrounding this team. They turned back to Chandler Morris at quarterback, who was the starter initially before he got hurt, and Max Duggan took over last season and led the Horned Frogs to their historic run. But they are also just a completely new look on offense. Kendall Briles comes in as the offensive coordinator. Dominic Williams, I think, is a big piece on their defensive line, who had an incredible freshman year last year. And the secondary is going to be another strong suit for the Horned Frogs. But I think that they have just lost too much, and it's going to be too much to handle in their first season. I think they regress a little bit, maybe not too much, but definitely a little bit. I don't think they win 13 games and go to the national championship this year. So I think Texas rebounds with a tough road win against TCU. Back-to-back tough road games as Texas heads to Ames in week number 12 of the season to face off against Iowa State. The Cyclones 4-8 overall last year, tied eighth best odds to win the Big 12. Texas has lost 3 out of the last 4 at Iowa State. So an interesting matchup here nonetheless. And I thought that this would be maybe a bit more of a trap game for Texas as they've struggled against the Cyclones here in recent years. But as the gambling scandals have unfolded a little bit more throughout the offseason, namely regarding starting quarterback Hunter Deckers, that's kind of changed my perspective on it a little bit. I think that if the Cyclones lose Deckers, it makes it a completely different team on offense. Not as much experience in that quarterback room. I think a guy like J.J. Cole, the true freshman there, has the potential to be something great, but maybe not in his freshman year. So they do have some solid pieces in Jalen Noel at wide receiver and T.J. Tampa on the defensive side of the ball. But I still think that the Texas roster and the Texas talent is going to outduel this Iowa State team, although they will make it difficult like they always do. Matt Campbell, you always have to tip your hat to as a coach. It always seems to have everything dialed up correctly defensively. Seems like Texas has struggled, especially on offense against the Cyclones the last few years. So I think this one is going to be difficult, but Texas pulls it out at Iowa State, which would be a huge win for them. And that win leads us to the final week of the season. Texas sitting at 9-2 in my predictions right now. Week 13 against Texas Tech in Austin. Joey McGuire 8-5 in his first season with the Red Raiders. They hold the 4th best odds to win the Big 12. They bring back 6 starters on a defense that was top 10 in FBS in red zone defense, but 108th overall defense. So an interesting little stat there. Great in the red zone, not so great overall. We'll see if there's improvement there after losing a guy like Tyree Wilson on the defensive line. Tyler Shuck will lead the offense. He has not lost a game that he has started and finished as a quarterback at Texas Tech. That's a nugget from Josh Pate over on the Late Kick podcast. Thank you, Josh, for that. So interesting number there with Shuck. They do have a solid wide receiver room, but not entirely sold on it just yet. We'll have a massive gap to fill on the defensive side of the ball with Wilson, like I mentioned, but they do have a lot of depth at the defensive line. So Texas Tech, I think they have another good season this upcoming year, and it's a close game in Austin, but I think the Longhorns pull this one out at home, which means they end the season at 10-2 in their final year in the Big 12 and appear in the Big 12 championship game. So that's my prediction for the season. I'm sure that there are a flurry of differences and disagreements with my opinion, so I would love to hear yours. Be sure to drop them in the comments section below and give your predictions for the Longhorns season. For the rest of the crew, my name's Tommy Yarrish. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.